Everyone bet on the rodeo champions, until the unknown boy approached the horse and whispered something. What happened next gave even the millionaire goosebumps. The dawn broke reluctantly over Oak Ridge, Colorado, casting long shadows across the aging trailer that Elijah Torres called home. At 16, he moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been performing the same routine for years. His slender fingers measured out the pills, 2 white, 1 blue, and arranged them beside a glass of water on a tray with a chipped mug of coffee, strong and black the way Abuela liked it. Outside, the mountains loomed purple against the awakening sky, indifferent sentinels to the struggles playing out in their shadow. Elijah paused at the narrow window, allowing himself 5 seconds of stillness before the day's responsibilities claimed him. "Abuela?" he called softly, pushing open the door to the small bedroom where Carmen Torres slept fitfully, her breathing a ragged whistle. "Time for your medicine." The 78-year-old woman stirred, her eyes opening to reveal the same deep brown as her grandson's. She attempted to sit up, triggering a violent coughing fit that shook her thin frame. Elijah rushed forward, supporting her shoulders with one arm while reaching for tissues with the other. The coughs tore through her, wet and painful, until finally she slumped back, exhausted. "Bad morning," she whispered, her accent thickening with fatigue. "Just breathe slow," Elijah replied, helping her with the pills, then the water. "Remember what Dr. Mason said." Carmen nodded weakly. 30 years working in the fields, spraying crops with chemicals nobody bothered to name for the Mexican laborers, had left her lungs scarred and deteriorating. The emphysema diagnosis had come 3 years ago, around the same time ICE agents had surrounded the processing plant where Elijah's mother worked. He pushed the memory away, focusing instead on adjusting Carmen's pillows. "I made eggs. You need to eat something with the medicine." "You should eat too, mijo. You're getting too skinny." Elijah forced a smile. "I'll eat at school. Mrs. Johnson sometimes gives me an extra muffin." This was a lie, but a necessary one. The food stamps never stretched through the month, and Elijah had learned to prioritize. Abuela's medicines first, then rent, then utilities. His own hunger was far down the list. He helped her eat a few bites, then gathered the tray. "I have to catch the bus. Your inhaler is right here, and I filled the humidifier. Mrs. Vasquez will come at noon to check on you." Carmen caught his hand, her fingers bird-like against his skin. "You are a good boy, Elijah. Your mama would be proud." Something twisted in his chest, but he only nodded and gently squeezed her hand before turning away. Outside, the ancient trailer creaked in the morning breeze. The heater had stopped working again last night, and the roof leaked in 3 places when it rained. Still, it was home, all that remained after his mother's deportation. The government men hadn't cared that Carmen was sick or that Elijah had been born in Colorado. They had only seen Maria Torres's expired visa. In the small bathroom, Elijah splashed cold water on his face and examined his reflection. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his black hair needed cutting. On the shelf beside the mirror sat his father's old guitar, the only inheritance from a man he'd never known, a Mexican musician who died in a car accident before Elijah was born. Sometimes Elijah would take out the cassette tapes his father had recorded, playing them on an ancient Walkman, trying to find himself in the melodies. More often he remembered his mother singing those same songs as lullabies, her voice soft in the darkness, smelling faintly of jasmine from the perfume she saved for special occasions. The battered clock on the wall showed 6:15. If he hurried, he could still make the early bus. Oak Ridge High School loomed gray and institutional against the morning sky. Elijah slipped through the front doors, head down, invisible by choice and circumstance. He moved through the crowded hallway like a ghost, unacknowledged and unbothered. In first period, a substitute teacher stood at the front of the class, struggling with the attendance sheet. "Elijah Torres?" the man called, mangling the pronunciation. "It's Elijah," he answered quietly, raising his hand slightly. 2 rows over, Tyler Matthews snickered. "Speak up, whisper boy. Can't hear you talking to your imaginary friends." Several students laughed. Elijah kept his eyes on his desk, jaw tight. He'd long ago learned that reactions only fed the fire. "That's enough," the substitute said half-heartedly, already moving to the next name. The morning dragged on until English class, the one bright spot in Elijah's school day. Ms. Rodriguez, with her brightly colored scarves and quick smile, was the only teacher who seemed to see him. "Excellent analysis, Elijah," she said, returning his paper on The Old Man and the Sea. "Your perspective on Santiago's relationship with the marlin shows remarkable insight." After class, she called him back as others filed out. "I noticed you've been reading this." She tapped a worn library book on animal behavior that peeked from his backpack. "Interested in becoming a veterinarian?" Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just understand them better sometimes. Animals, I mean." Ms. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "You know, there are scholarship programs for students interested in animal science. You have the grades for it." "I can't leave my grandmother," he replied automatically. Something like sadness flickered across her face. "Well, keep reading. Knowledge is never wasted." As he turned to go, she added, "And Elijah, ignore Tyler and his friends. Some people are intimidated by quiet strength." He nodded, grateful but unconvinced. Outside in the hallway, Tyler and two friends waited, blocking his path. "Hey, Whisper Boy, we saw you talking to that mangy dog again this morning." Tyler smirked. "What's the matter? Can't make human friends?" Elijah tried to step around them, but one boy shoved him back. His books scattered across the floor. "Maybe he thinks he's Dr. Doolittle," another boy laughed. "Hey, Torres, what did the dog tell you? That you and your grandma should go back to Mexico?" Something hot and fierce rose in Elijah's chest, but before he could respond, Ms. Rodriguez's voice cut through the hallway. "Matthews, Lopez, principal's office now." The boys slouched away, but not before Tyler hissed, "Freak," under his breath. Ms. Rodriguez helped Elijah gather his books. "You should report this harassment." "It's fine," he mumbled. "They're not wrong about the dog thing." "What do you mean?" Elijah hesitated, then said quietly, "I talk to old Bruno sometimes, the stray behind the gym. He understands me." Instead of the mockery he expected, Ms. Rodriguez simply nodded. "My abuela used to say some people have a gift. They can hear what animals cannot say with words. In our culture, that's considered special, not strange." For a moment, Elijah felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and desperately needed. Saturday morning found Elijah at Doc Peterson's stables on the outskirts of town. The old veterinarian, long retired from regular practice, kept a few horses for rehabilitation, mostly cases deemed too difficult or expensive by their owners. "Morning, son," Doc called from inside a stall. "Can you start with Mariposa's feed? She didn't touch her breakfast." Elijah moved to the stall where an elderly mare stood with her head lowered, legs stiff with arthritis. Without speaking, he approached slowly, feeling the waves of discomfort radiating from her. When he reached her side, he placed a gentle hand on her neck, closing his eyes briefly. "Her joints are worse today," he said softly. "The weather's changing." Doc Peterson emerged from the adjacent stall, wiping his hands. "Can't fool you, can I? I was just mixing her new pain medication." While Doc prepared the injection, Elijah whispered in Spanish to the mare, telling her about the wildflowers he'd seen on his walkover, describing their colors and scents. Gradually, the tension in her body eased, her breathing slowing to match his. When Doc returned with the syringe, he found Mariposa standing calmly, her head resting against Elijah's shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned," the old man murmured. "Last time I tried to give her a shot, it took 2 helpers and a rope halter." Elijah continued his soft murmuring as Doc administered the medication, the mare barely flinching. "You have a gift, boy," Doc said afterward, studying Elijah with thoughtful eyes. "Ever since you started helping out, even the most difficult animals calm down. How do you do it?" Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "I just feel what they feel. It's like their fear or pain gets inside me, and then I can help them through it." "Empathy," Doc nodded. "True empathy, not the watered-down version most people manage. It's rare. As they worked through the morning chores, Doc's ancient radio crackled with local news. A story about Richard Blackwell's latest acquisition caught Elijah's attention. Texas oil magnate Richard Blackwell unveiled the newest addition to his prized equine collection last night. A wild Mustang captured following the devastating Wyoming wildfires that claimed thousands of acres of protected habitat. Blackwell, Doc snorted, shaking his head. Man buys up half the county, acts like he owns the air we breathe. What's special about this horse? Elijah asked. Mustang, son. Not just any horse. Symbol of the Wild West. Blackwell probably paid a fortune just to show he could. Doc's expression darkened. Those wildfires were a tragedy. Entire herds lost their grazing land. Many died. Any survivors deserve better than becoming trophies for rich men. Later that afternoon, Elijah stood behind the counter at Oak Ridge Diner, his school backpack stashed beneath the sink. The dinner rush wouldn't start for another hour, but a group of cowboys occupied the corner booth, their voices carrying. $1 million, one said, whistling low. That's what Blackwell's offering to anyone who can break that devil horse before the Derby. You going for it, Buck? Another asked. A heavy-set man with a weathered face grunted. Might. Though I heard Simmons tried already. Got his arm broken and a concussion for his trouble. What did he do wrong? Nothing. That's the thing. Horse is unnatural, vicious, like it hates people. Blackwell's caretaker says it tries to kill anyone who enters the pen. Just needs the right touch, Buck said, cracking his knuckles. I've broken meaner. Starvation works wonders. 3 days without water, and they're suddenly real cooperative. If that fails, there's always the twisted wire bit. Elijah felt sick as he wiped down tables, pretending not to listen. He'd seen horses that had been broken by such methods. Their spirits crushed, eyes vacant, bodies responsive, but souls extinguished. You need anything else? He asked quietly, refilling coffee cups. Buck glanced up, noticing him for the first time. More pie, boy, and be quick about it. As Elijah turned to go, Buck added to his companions. $1 million. Could buy a lot of land with that. Hell, could buy that fancy guitar in Phillips's window, the one with mother-of-pearl inlay, and still have enough left to retire on. For the first time that day, Elijah felt a flicker of interest that wasn't immediately extinguished by necessity. A guitar like that could replace his father's worn instrument, could maybe even help him remember the melodies that were fading along with memories of his mother's voice. The evening was settling into dusk as Elijah finished delivering the last newspaper on his route. Normally, he would head straight home to check on Abuela, but something pulled him toward the outskirts of town, where Blackwell Ranch sprawled across the valley. He told himself he was just curious about the Mustang everyone was talking about. $1 million was more money than he could imagine, enough for Abuela's treatments, maybe even enough to hire lawyers to fight his mother's deportation. The massive iron gates of Blackwell Ranch loomed ahead, but Elijah veered off the main road, following a deer trail that skirted the property line. He'd explored these woods often, finding peace in the solitude, talking to birds and squirrels when human company proved too demanding. After 15 minutes of walking, he glimpsed a separate enclosure set apart from the main stables. High fences surrounded a sparse paddock where a solitary figure stood motionless. Even from a distance, the Mustang was magnificent, coal black from nose to tail, with powerful muscles defined beneath a coat that captured the last light of day. But it was the stillness that struck Elijah most, the way the animal stood facing the distant mountains, as if yearning for something beyond the horizon. There was such profound loneliness in that posture that Elijah felt an answering ache in his own chest. Drawn forward as if by an invisible thread, he moved closer to the fence, forgetting caution in his need to see those eyes. A dry branch snapped beneath his foot. The sound cracked through the evening stillness like a gunshot. The Mustang spun with explosive speed, transforming instantly from statue to coiled spring. Elijah froze, expecting the animal to bolt or charge. Instead, their eyes met across the space, and something extraordinary happened. In place of the terror or rage everyone described, Elijah saw recognition, awareness, intelligence so acute it seemed almost human. The Mustang's eyes were dark pools reflecting the fading light, but behind them burned a consciousness that reached across the species divide and touched something deep within the boy's soul. "You also lost everything," Elijah whispered in Spanish, the language that still felt most natural for his deepest thoughts. "You also are alone in a place that doesn't understand who you are." The Mustang's ears flicked forward, focused intently on his voice. Neither advancing nor retreating, it simply watched, the first time since its capture that it had not attacked or fled from human presence. Time stretched between them, a bridge of silence more meaningful than words. Elijah lost track of how long they stood there, locked in that strange communion, until voices and flashlight beams cut through the gathering darkness. "Check the perimeter again. Blackwell wants security doubled around that horse." Elijah melted back into the shadows of the trees, his heart pounding not with fear but with certainty. In that brief moment of connection, the Mustang everyone called a demon had shown him something different, a soul as broken and displaced as his own, crying out in a language no one else could hear. As he ran home through the deepening night, one thought burned bright and true. He had to find a way back to that horse. That night, Elijah tossed restlessly in his narrow bed, the Mustang's gaze haunting his dreams. He woke in the darkness, his heart pounding with an urgency he couldn't explain. Fumbling for the lamp, he pulled his worn sketchbook from beneath his mattress and began to draw by the weak yellow light. His fingers moved across the page with unusual certainty, capturing the proud arch of the Mustang's neck, the tensed muscles ready for flight, and those eyes, those impossibly knowing eyes that had looked straight through him. When he finished, Elijah stared at the drawing, surprised by its accuracy. He rarely drew anything, yet the horse had imprinted itself on his memory with perfect clarity. The bedside clock showed 3:17 in the morning. School would come too soon, but sleep now seemed impossible. Instead, he carefully tore out the page and pinned it to the wall beside his bed, a silent promise to return. When Elijah emerged from his room the next morning, Abuela Carmen was already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table with her oxygen tank beside her. Her observant eyes narrowed as he prepared her medicine. "Sus ojos tienen luz hoy, mijo," she said softly. "Your eyes have light today." "What happened?" Elijah hesitated, measuring out pills with practiced precision. "Nothing, Abuela. Just had a good dream." She smiled, not believing him but willing to let it pass. "Dreams are messages from the soul," my grandmother always said. "Good ones should be treasured." As he placed the medicine beside her, she caught his wrist, her touch feather-light. "You work too hard, carry too much. It's good to see something wake up the boy inside the man you've had to become." He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond to the truth in her words. Instead, he kissed her papery cheek and hurried to prepare for school. At Oak Ridge High, Elijah moved through his morning classes in a distracted haze, his thoughts constantly returning to the Mustang. During lunch period, he slipped away to the music room, finding it empty as usual. From the storage closet, he retrieved his father's old guitar, which Ms. Rodriguez had allowed him to keep there rather than carry it back and forth to school. His fingers moved awkwardly over the strings, searching for melodies half-remembered from childhood. The guitar was badly out of tune, 2 strings replaced with whatever had been available. Still, he persisted, trying to recall the lullabies his mother had sung when nightmares woke him. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the door open. "I didn't know you played," Ms. Rodriguez said, startling him. Elijah nearly dropped the guitar. "I don't, not really. My father did." She leaned against the doorframe, her colorful scarf bright against her dark sweater. "You're carrying it everywhere lately. I noticed it in your backpack yesterday." "I'm trying to remember some songs," he admitted. "My mom used to sing them." Something in her expression softened. "Music can keep people with us long after they're gone. Let me help you with that tuning." After school, Elijah sat in the small yard behind their trailer, practicing chords as the afternoon light waned. His fingers were clumsy, calloused from work rather than music, but he persisted until a simple melody emerged, a fragment of La Llorona that his mother had sung on quiet evenings. With the guitar secured carefully in its case, he made his decision. Tomorrow, after his shift at the diner, he would return to Blackwell Ranch. The next afternoon found Elijah following the same deer trail to the isolated paddock. This time he came prepared, bringing his father's guitar and settling beneath an ancient oak tree at a respectful distance from the fence. The Mustang stood at the far end of the enclosure, head high, nostrils flaring at the scent of a human visitor. Unlike other horses that might approach a fence out of curiosity or hope for treats, this one maintained its distance, every line of its body radiating wariness. Elijah made no attempt to move closer. Instead, he simply sat cross-legged on the ground and began to play, his fingers finding the chords of the lullaby he'd practiced. He played softly, without expectation, his eyes lowered to give the Mustang space to observe him without feeling threatened. The horse's reaction was subtle, a slight turn of the head, one ear swiveling in Elijah's direction. For nearly an hour, this was the only acknowledgement of his presence. When shadows lengthened across the paddock, Elijah packed up his guitar and left without looking back, understanding instinctively that forcing eye contact would only reinforce the animal's distrust. As he walked home in the gathering dusk, he wondered if he was being foolish. What did he hope to accomplish? He had no illusions about claiming Blackwell's $1 million prize. Yet something about the Mustang's isolation called to him in a language deeper than words. The next morning, the diner buzzed with news of the latest failed attempt to tame Blackwell's Mustang. "Heard Jackson got thrown so hard he broke 2 ribs," said a local rancher, nursing his coffee at the counter where Elijah was wiping down. "Horse nearly took his head off with those hooves. Blackwell's bringing in some hotshot from Montana now," another replied. "Guy claims he can break any horse in a week." "What's his method?" "Sleep deprivation mainly. Keeps him in a round pen, doesn't let him rest. After 3 days with no sleep, they'll accept anything just to get some peace." Elijah's hand tightened on his cleaning cloth, something cold settling in his stomach. He'd seen a horse once that had been trained that way, a beautiful Palomino reduced to a trembling, hollow-eyed shadow. Doc Peterson had spent months helping the animal recover, and even then, it startled at the slightest movement. That evening, Elijah returned to the oak tree with his guitar and something new, a bright red apple sliced into quarters. After playing for half an hour, he approached the fence for the first time, placing a slice on the top rail before retreating to his spot under the tree. "I know what it's like," he said softly in Spanish, not caring if anyone might hear him talking to an animal. "To be taken from everything familiar, to be surrounded by people who don't understand you." The Mustang watched from a distance, ears pricked forward despite its rigid posture. "My mother used to sing this song when I was afraid," Elijah continued, strumming gently. "She said my father wrote it for her when they first met. I don't remember him, but sometimes I think his hands remember these chords." For 3 days, the ritual remained the same. Elijah would play, talk softly in Spanish, leave a slice of apple, and depart without demanding anything. On the 4th day, he arrived to find the previous day's apple gone from the fence rail. Progress came in microscopic increments. By the 2nd week, the Mustang no longer retreated to the far end of the paddock when Elijah appeared. By the 3rd week, it would stand at middle distance, watching intently as he played. Once, when Elijah hit a particularly sour note, the horse snorted and shook its head, almost seeming to express an opinion on his musical abilities. "Everyone's a critic," Elijah murmured, smiling for what felt like the first time in years. He hadn't noticed Manuel Ortiz, the ranch's assistant caretaker, observing from a distance until the older man approached one evening as Elijah was packing up to leave. "The devil horse likes you," Manuel said, keeping his voice low. 3 weeks, and he hasn't tried to kill you yet. That's a record." Elijah tensed, expecting to be ordered off the property. "I'm not causing any trouble." Manuel studied him thoughtfully. "My grandmother in Oaxaca, she talked about people like you, Los que hablan con los animales, the ones who speak with animals. He glanced back at the Mustang, who was watching their interaction warily. That horse nearly took off Jackson's head, kicked through a wooden stall like it was paper. But he watches you like he's listening. Word spread quietly among the Latino workers at Blackwell Ranch. Elena from housekeeping mentioned it to Maria in the kitchen, who told her cousin who worked in the stables. Soon, a handful of workers were finding excuses to pass by the isolated paddock during Elijah's visits, watching from a respectful distance. El chico mexicano le habla al caballo, they whispered. The Mexican boy talks to the horse, and the horse listens. On the first day of the 4th week, Elijah brought a carrot along with the usual apple. This time, when he placed the offerings on the fence rail, he lingered a moment longer, speaking softly. I brought something special today, he said, retrieving his guitar. It's a song about mountains and valleys, about missing home. He began to play a melody more complex than his usual offerings, a traditional folk song his mother claimed had been sung in her family for generations. As the music floated across the paddock, the Mustang took 3 steps forward, then stopped, still maintaining a cautious distance but clearly drawn by the sound. Elijah continued playing, keeping his movements slow and predictable. When he finished the song, he simply said, "Gracias por escuchar," thanking the horse for listening, and prepared to leave as usual. But this time, something extraordinary happened. The Mustang approached the fence, stopping about 10 feet away, the closest it had ever come voluntarily. For one breathtaking moment, they regarded each other in silence, an understanding passing between them that transcended species. The spell broke when voices approached, ranch hands changing shifts. The Mustang retreated instantly, and Elijah slipped away through the trees, his heart pounding with a quiet triumph. Manuel Ortiz observed these developments with growing interest. One evening, as Blackwell made his weekly inspection of the property, the caretaker ventured a comment. "The Mexican boy is there again," he said, nodding toward the distant paddock. "And the strange thing is, the horse doesn't try to attack him." Blackwell barely glanced up from his clipboard. Probably because he stays outside the fence. Any idiot can look at a horse from a distance. He plays music for him, talks to him in Spanish. "Spanish?" Blackwell snorted. "What, does he think the horse is Mexican too?" Manuel shrugged. "All I know is that animal has tried to kill every man who's come near him, but he stands quiet when the boy plays." "Well, unless the boy can put a saddle on him and ride him in the derby, I don't particularly care if he serenades my horse." Blackwell checked his watch impatiently. "Just make sure he's not damaging anything or creating liability issues." As Blackwell walked away, Manuel crossed himself quietly. There was something unnatural about a man so cold who could look at a magnificent creature like that Mustang and see only dollar signs and status symbols. The following evening, Elijah made a momentous decision. From his backpack, he carefully removed the colorful Mexican blanket his mother had woven years ago, one of the few possessions she'd managed to pass to Carmen before her deportation. The blanket was slightly frayed at the edges but still vibrant with reds, blues, and yellows in traditional patterns. "This is important to me," he told the Mustang, who stood watching from its now customary middle distance. "My mother made it. When I wrap myself in it, I can still smell her perfume sometimes. Just a little." With reverent care, he draped the blanket over the fence rail, arranging it so the pattern was clearly visible in the fading light. "It's the only thing I have that's really mine," he continued softly. "Not something we need to survive, just something that matters to my heart. I thought maybe you'd like to know what that feels like, to have something that's not about survival or control." The Mustang's ears flicked forward, tracking every word as if understanding the meaning beneath the sounds. As Elijah played a final song for the evening, the horse edged slightly closer to the colorful fabric, nostrils flaring to catch its unfamiliar scent. When Elijah left, he did something he'd never done before. He left the blanket behind, draped across the fence like an offering or perhaps an invitation. The next morning, he woke before dawn, anxiety propelling him out of bed. What if it rained overnight? What if the blanket, this irreplaceable connection to his mother, was ruined or gone? He rushed through his morning duties, promising Abuela he'd be back soon, and practically ran the entire way to Blackwell Ranch, arriving breathless as the first light touched the mountains. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The blanket was no longer on the fence. It lay spread on the ground inside the paddock, and the Mustang, the untouchable, untamable black Mustang that had injured 3 professional trainers, was lying down upon it, sleeping deeply with his head relaxed and his breathing even. As ranch workers arrived for the morning shift, they stopped in astonishment at the unprecedented sight. Manuel quickly took a photo with his phone, his weathered face breaking into an incredulous smile. "El susurrador," he whispered. The whisperer. Word of the Mustang sleeping on Elijah's blanket spread quickly among the ranch workers. By mid-morning, a small cluster of Latino employees had found reasons to pass by the paddock, each stopping to witness the miracle with their own eyes. "My grandfather told stories of such people in Mexico," whispered Luisa, an older woman who worked in the laundry. "Los susurradores, those who understand the silent language of animals." Manuel nodded solemnly. "My grandmother spoke of them too. She said they carry the old magic from before the conquistadors." The Mustang remained on the blanket longer than anyone had seen him rest before. When he finally rose, stretching his powerful legs, he didn't kick the colorful fabric away or trample it as might be expected. Instead, he carefully stepped around it, preserving its integrity in a way that seemed almost deliberate. Elijah returned that afternoon with dark circles under his eyes, having worked a double shift at Doc Peterson's stables. The old veterinarian had noticed his exhaustion immediately. "You're dead on your feet, boy," Doc said, studying Elijah's face as they finished treating an elderly mare's infected hoof. "When was the last time you got a full night's sleep?" Elijah shrugged, avoiding the question. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Doc set down his instruments and fixed Elijah with a stern gaze. "You've been distracted all morning. Nearly gave Mrs. Wilson's terrier twice the medication." He paused, expression softening. "What's going on? Is your grandmother worse?" "Abuela's the same," Elijah replied, methodically cleaning the treatment area. "It's just, there's this horse." Doc Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Blackwell's Mustang? The one everyone's talking about?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded. "I've heard rumors," Doc said carefully, "that someone's been visiting that horse, playing music." He studied Elijah's face. "That wouldn't happen to be you, would it?" Before Elijah could respond, Doc held up a weathered hand. "Don't answer that, but know this. Wild Mustangs aren't like domesticated horses. They've never known humans as anything but threats. Whatever you might be doing, be careful." That evening, when Elijah returned home, he found Abuela Carmen sitting at their small kitchen table, something clutched in her thin hands. As he approached, he recognized his drawing of Tornado. "What animal is this that steals your sleep, Elijah?" she asked softly, her eyes knowing beneath their cloudy film of cataracts. Elijah sank into the chair opposite her, suddenly too tired to maintain his secrets. "A Mustang. At Blackwell Ranch." The words tumbled out then, describing the midnight black horse with eyes that understood loneliness, the connection he felt from their first meeting, his evening visits with the guitar. Abuela listened without interruption, her fingers tracing the lines of his drawing. When he finished, she smiled gently. "Your mother had this gift too," she said. "When she was small, birds would land on her shoulders in the garden. Stray dogs followed her home. I used to scold her, but your grandfather said it was a blessing, not a burden." Her smile faded. "The world is not always kind to those with special gifts, mijo. Be careful." The warning echoed in Elijah's mind the next day as he observed the growing number of professional cowboys arriving at Blackwell Ranch. From his position at the diner counter, he could see their trucks with Montana and Wyoming plates parked outside the local motel, each man confident that he would be the one to claim the $1 million prize. Richard Blackwell watched these arrivals from the window of his study, his patience wearing thinner with each failed attempt to tame the Mustang. What had begun as an impressive acquisition, the wild centerpiece of his collection, was rapidly becoming an embarrassment. The Derby was now less than 4 weeks away, and the legendary horse remained as untouchable as the day it arrived. When his caretaker mentioned yet another trainer leaving with injuries, Blackwell's composure finally cracked. Slamming his tumbler of bourbon onto the desk, he stormed out to his Range Rover and drove to the isolated paddock. It was pure coincidence that Elijah was there, just setting up his usual spot beneath the oak tree. Blackwell's vehicle skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust, and the Mustang immediately retreated to the farthest corner of the enclosure, head high and nostrils flared in alarm. "You!" Blackwell called, striding toward Elijah with barely contained fury. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" Elijah froze, guitar in hand, the color draining from his face. "I was just trespassing," Blackwell finished for him. "This is private property, not a public park." The Mustang paced nervously at the far end of the paddock, eyes fixed on the confrontation. "I'm sorry, sir," Elijah said quietly, beginning to pack away his guitar. "I wasn't causing any harm." Blackwell's eyes narrowed as he noticed the instrument. "You're the one they're talking about. The Mexican kid who plays music for my horse." His tone dripped with derision. "What exactly do you think you're accomplishing here?" Something in the dismissive tone, so familiar from years of being overlooked and underestimated, sparked an unusual defiance in Elijah. Looking directly at Blackwell for the first time, he said, "He doesn't need to be dominated, Mr. Blackwell. He needs to be listened to." "Listened to?" Blackwell's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Did you hear that?" He called to a security guard who had followed in a separate vehicle. "The immigrant boy thinks the horse wants to have a conversation." Turning back to Elijah, his tone hardened. "Listen here, kid. I have professional trainers working with that animal. Men who understand horses, not children who play lullabies." Elijah stood his ground, surprising himself with his continued courage. "With respect, sir, your trainers have all failed." The truth of the statement only inflamed Blackwell's anger. "Get off my land," he said through clenched teeth. "If I catch you trespassing again, I'll have you arrested, and I'll make sure your family faces consequences too. Do I make myself clear?" Elijah nodded, gathering his belongings with as much dignity as he could muster. As he walked away, he felt Blackwell's eyes boring into his back, and more intensely, the gaze of the Mustang following his retreat. Despite the threat, Elijah couldn't stay away. The following evening he returned, this time leaving his mother's blanket once again draped over the fence rail. It was a risk, but something told him the connection he'd established was too important to abandon. His instinct proved correct. While the Mustang remained more distant that night, wary after the previous day's confrontation, it gradually edged closer as Elijah played, drawn by the familiar melodies that had become a constant in its chaotic new life. For 3 more evenings, their ritual continued undisturbed. On the 4th night, as Elijah played the final notes of a gentle ballad, he noticed the Mustang had come closer than ever before, standing just feet from the fence, its breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the music. "I won't give up on you," Elijah promised softly in Spanish. "No matter what he says or does." The weather had been unusually dry for weeks, the mountain's tinderbox ready under the relentless Colorado sun. When the storm finally broke, it did so with apocalyptic fury. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, thunder rolling across the valley like artillery fire. Elijah was closing up at the diner when the first raindrops hit, fat and heavy against the windows. By the time he'd finished, the storm had intensified into a downpour that instantly soaked him as he stepped outside. His first thought was of Abuela, alone in their trailer with its leaking roof. His second, equally powerful, was of Tornado. From what he'd observed, the Mustang was particularly sensitive to loud noises, a common trait in horses who'd survived traumatic experiences like wildfires. Lightning illuminated the street as Elijah hesitated under the diner's awning. The sensible choice was clear. Go home, check on his grandmother. yet something pulled at him with undeniable urgency. "Sorry, abuela," he whispered, turning toward Blackwell Ranch instead of their trailer. "I'll be quick." The rain was relentless as he ran, turning the dirt paths to mud that sucked at his shoes. Twice, he nearly fell, the guitar case on his back throwing off his balance. By the time he reached the paddock, he was gasping for breath, his clothes plastered to his skin. What he saw stopped his heart. The Mustang was in a state of blind panic, charging the fence repeatedly, then wheeling to run frantic circles around the enclosure. Each lightning flash sent him into new heights of terror, each thunderclap triggering another desperate attempt to escape. Already, blood streaked his sleek sides where he'd crashed against the fence posts. Without conscious thought, Elijah found himself at the gate, fingers fumbling with the latch. Some distant part of his mind screamed warnings about Blackwell's threats, about the danger of entering an enclosure with a panicked half-ton animal. But these concerns seemed trivial compared to the raw suffering before him. The gate swung open. Elijah stepped inside, rain streaming down his face, heart hammering against his ribs. "Estoy aquí," he called over the storm's fury. "I'm here." The Mustang stopped mid-stride, frozen by the human voice, by the unthinkable reality of a person inside his sanctuary. For one terrible moment, Elijah thought the horse would charge him, trampling him in blind fear. Instead, the animal trembled violently, eyes wide and showing white all around. Nostrils flared as he sucked in panicked breaths. Lightning flashed again, illuminating them both in stark relief, boy and horse, soaked and afraid, facing each other in the heart of the storm. With shaking hands, Elijah unslung his guitar case and opened it. The instrument would be ruined by the rain, but that hardly mattered now. Strumming was impossible with his numb fingers, but he could still sing. The lullaby rose from his throat, barely audible beneath the rain's percussion, yet steady and unwavering. Step by tiny step, he approached the terrified animal, never breaking eye contact, never faltering in his song. When another lightning bolt shattered the sky, the Mustang flinched but didn't flee, seemingly anchored by Elijah's voice cutting through the chaos. Finally, standing close enough to feel the horse's breath on his face, Elijah slowly raised his hand, palm upward, an offering, not a demand. Time suspended between heartbeats. Then, with infinite gentleness, the Mustang lowered his massive head and touched his velvet muzzle to Elijah's open palm. The simple contact contained universes. Every barrier, species, language, trauma, dissolved in that moment of pure trust. Elijah continued singing, tears mingling with raindrops on his face as he carefully placed his other hand on the horse's wet neck. The Mustang trembled but allowed the touch, drawing comfort from the human presence he had feared for so long. They remained that way through the worst of the storm, two broken beings finding shelter in each other's presence. As the thunder gradually receded and the rain softened to a gentle patter, exhaustion overtook them both. Elijah sank to the muddy ground, back against the fence post, his voice finally giving out. To his amazement, the Mustang slowly folded his legs and settled beside him, close enough that Elijah could feel the heat of his body cutting through the night's chill. The colorful blanket, sodden but intact, lay nearby. With the last of his strength, Elijah reached for it, draping it over both himself and the Mustang's shoulders. "We'll be okay," he whispered, leaning his head against the powerful neck beside him. "We'll be okay now." As dawn broke over Blackwell Ranch, the first workers arrived to find an impossible scene. The feared Mustang and the Mexican boy sleeping peacefully side by side, the boy's arm draped protectively over the animal's neck, both wrapped in a rain-soaked but brilliantly colored blanket. The capataz, speechless at the sight, instinctively pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. Within an hour, the image of the boy embraced with the untamable black demon exploded across social media in the small town, and the local newspaper was already calling the ranch, while Blackwell, furious at being awakened with the news, hurled his phone against the wall. "Bring that damn boy to my office immediately." The image of Elijah sleeping beside the fearsome Mustang raced through Oak Ridge with the speed of a prairie fire. By noon, The photo had been shared hundreds of times on local social media, and the Oak Ridge Tribune rushed to print a special afternoon edition with the image splashed across its front page. The headline read, "The Whisperer, local boy tames Blackwell's untamable black Mustang." Richard Blackwell's Range Rover skidded to a halt in front of the paddock, gravel spraying beneath its tires. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline blue sky and puddles that mirrored the clouds. A small crowd had gathered, ranch workers, neighbors, and curious townsfolk drawn by the viral photo. In the center of this impromptu audience stood Elijah, still wearing his rain-dampened clothes from the night before, gently brushing mud from Tornado's gleaming coat. The Mustang stood with uncharacteristic calm, occasionally turning his head to nuzzle the boy's shoulder. "What the hell is going on here?" Blackwell shouted, pushing through the onlookers. His custom boots sank into the mud as he approached, face flushed with fury. "This is $1 million animal, not some pet for a kid to play with." Doc Peterson stepped forward, positioning himself between Blackwell and Elijah. The old veterinarian had arrived minutes earlier, concerned after seeing the photo shared by one of his clients. "Mr. Blackwell," he said evenly, "this young man has accomplished in 3 weeks what your professional trainers couldn't manage in months. Perhaps we should nothing." Blackwell cut him off, jabbing a finger toward Doc's chest. "This is my horse, my property, and this boy is trespassing on my land." The Mustang's ears flattened against his head at Blackwell's raised voice, his body tensing visibly. Elijah placed a calming hand on the animal's neck, murmuring something too soft for others to hear. Remarkably, Tornado relaxed again, though his eyes remained fixed on Blackwell. "You," the millionaire said, turning his attention to Elijah. "Off my property, now, and don't come back." Elijah met Blackwell's gaze, his voice quiet but steady. "Please, Mr. Blackwell, he's still scared. He needs time to—" "What he needs is a real trainer, not some immigrant guitar player," Blackwell snapped, signaling to his security guards. "Get this kid out of here and move the horse to the main stable. Troy Reynolds arrives from Texas tomorrow, and he'll show everyone how a horse should be properly handled." 2 security guards moved forward reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with their task. As they approached, Tornado's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The Mustang positioned himself between the men and Elijah, ears pinned back, a warning rumble vibrating from his chest. The crowd gasped and retreated several steps, even Blackwell's men hesitating at this unexpected development. "Mirren!" Maria exclaimed from among the kitchen staff who had come to witness the miracle. "The horse protects him. This is a sign, Senor Blackwell." "Sign nothing," Blackwell muttered, though uncertainty flickered across his face. "He's probably drugging the animal." It was then that Blackwell noticed a man with a professional camera capturing the scene, and beside him, a woman holding a microphone with the Denver Channel 7 logo. His expression shifted instantly, the practiced smile of a businessman replacing his scowl. "You know what?" he said, lowering his voice and approaching Elijah with false conviviality. "Let's discuss this like reasonable people, away from the crowd." He placed a firm hand on Elijah's shoulder, steering him away from curious ears. The Mustang followed with his eyes, taking a step forward before Elijah signaled him to stay with a subtle hand gesture. "Look, kid," Blackwell said once they were out of earshot, "what you've done is impressive. I won't deny that. But this is a valuable animal, an investment. I have plans for him." Elijah said nothing, his expression guarded. Blackwell glanced back at the news crew, then made a swift calculation. "Come to my office in the main house. We should talk properly." 20 minutes later, Elijah sat stiffly in a leather armchair that probably cost more than everything his family owned. Blackwell's office was a shrine to wealth and conquest. Mounted trophy heads stared glassily from the walls. Photographs showed the millionaire with various celebrities and politicians, and behind his massive desk hung an oil painting of Blackwell himself astride a white stallion. $1 million, Blackwell said, writing a figure on a check with a gold fountain pen. "The prize I promised. It's yours." He slid the check across the polished desk along with a multi-page document. "All you need to do is sign this agreement, transferring all rights to your training method and agreeing to a non-disclosure clause." Elijah stared at the check, its amount incomprehensible. $1 million would transform his life completely. Abuela's medical care, a real home instead of the leaking trailer, perhaps even attorneys who could help with his mother's deportation case. Everything he'd struggled for since age 13 could be solved with a signature. "What will happen to Tornado?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Blackwell waved dismissively. "That's not your concern." When Elijah didn't reach for the check, he sighed impatiently. "But since you asked, he'll compete in the Derby as planned, then move on to the exhibition circuit. With his temperament, he'll probably end up in the Texas rodeo circuit as a bronc horse. They love the difficult ones down there." The words painted a vivid picture in Elijah's mind. Tornado in a bucking chute, terrified by screaming crowds, spurred until he bled for people's entertainment, his spirit systematically crushed. The very thought made his stomach clench. "I can't accept, sir," he said, standing up. "Tornado isn't an object. He trusts me. I can't betray that trust." "Don't be ridiculous, boy." Blackwell slammed his palm against the desk. "We're talking about an animal, an investment, and I'm offering more money than you or your family will see in a lifetime." "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. The answer is no." The refusal ignited something dangerous in Blackwell's eyes. "Get out," he said quietly, "and don't come near my property again. We'll see how your magical connection holds up when that animal hasn't seen you for a week." Elijah's rejection of the $1 million offer marked the beginning of a calculated campaign against him. The next morning, when he attempted to visit Tornado, security guards blocked his entry at the main gate. "Mr. Blackwell's orders," said a guard who couldn't quite meet his eyes. "No visitors to the property without prior authorization." Through ranch workers sympathetic to his cause, Elijah learned that Tornado had been moved to an interior stable, away from public view. The Mustang had fought the transfer violently, injuring 2 handlers and destroying a wooden partition before being secured in a reinforced stall. Ms. Rodriguez organized a small protest at the ranch entrance 3 days later, bringing several students and community members with hand-painted signs reading, "Let the Whisperer in," and "Horses need compassion, not cruelty." "This isn't just about an animal," she told the small gathering. "It's about recognizing that sometimes the most vulnerable among us have wisdom, the powerful refuse to hear." Doc Peterson made his own attempt at intervention, confronting Blackwell at the Oak Ridge Country Club where the Millionaire was hosting potential investors. "What you're doing is wrong, Richard," the old veterinarian said, interrupting Blackwell's lunch. "That boy has a special gift. The methods your man Reynolds is planning to use are outdated and cruel." "This is a private club, Peterson," Blackwell replied coldly. "And you're creating a scene. I suggest you leave before I have you removed." "You know I'm right," Doc pressed on. "You've seen how that horse responds to the boy. What Reynolds plans, sleep deprivation, forced submission. It's barbaric." "It's efficient," Blackwell countered, "and legal. Now for the last time, remove yourself from my table." When Doc refused, security escorted him out. By evening, his membership had been permanently revoked. The situation escalated further when Troy Reynolds arrived from Texas with his team and specialized equipment. Maria, who worked in the kitchen of the main house, overheard their discussion with Blackwell. "We'll use the accelerated method," Reynolds explained, examining the reinforced stall where Tornado stood alert and wary. 3 days without water, then complete confinement. When we're done, he'll accept anyone in the saddle." Maria crossed herself, horrified by the casual cruelty in the man's tone. That night, she called Elijah from the ranch phone. "They plan to break him completely, mijo," she whispered. "The Texan, he brought terrible things, spurs with sharp points, a bit that cuts the mouth. You must do something." Desperate, Elijah made several attempts to enter the property through back trails and service roads, only to be intercepted each time by the increased security patrols Blackwell had implemented. The community's support grew steadily as word spread about the methods being employed. Latino workers from neighboring ranches shared stories of Reynolds' reputation. Horses left broken in spirit, some with permanent physical damage from his training. The breaking point came 4 days after Reynolds began his conditioning of Tornado. Maria, unable to bear the sounds coming from the stable, secretly used her phone to film through a window. The footage showed Tornado tied in a position that prevented him from moving or lying down, his proud head restrained by crossed ties, while Reynolds applied a whip to his flanks when the Mustang resisted the saddle. The video spread rapidly through social media, accompanied by Maria's tearful narration in Spanish. "This is not training. This is torture of a magnificent creature." Within hours, the Denver television station sent a full crew. Animal rights activists began camping at the ranch gates. Sheriff Wilson, a longtime friend of Blackwell's, found himself pressured to investigate allegations of animal cruelty. Cornered by the growing public relations disaster, Blackwell summoned Elijah to the ranch once more. This time, the millionaire looked visibly stressed, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. "2 million, he offered without preamble, writing a new figure on a check. 2 million. And you come here, calm that damn horse for the cameras, and everyone goes home happy." Elijah studied Blackwell's face, seeing the calculation behind the offer. "And after?" he asked quietly. "What happens to him after the cameras leave?" When Blackwell hesitated, his answer obvious in his silence, Elijah understood everything. The answer is still no. That night, the situation took a dramatic turn. Tornado, in constant panic since being separated from Elijah and subjected to Reynolds' methods, broke through the reinforced doors of his stall during another training attempt. The Mustang's explosive escape seriously injured Reynolds and 2 assistants, leaving the Texan with a broken arm and concussion. Bleeding from wounds caused by the restraint equipment, Tornado galloped frantically around the property, crashing through fences and creating total chaos. Alerted by frantic calls from ranch workers, Elijah raced to the scene to find police cars, ambulances, and a crowd of onlookers. Through the confusion, he heard Blackwell shouting orders. "Shoot it if necessary. That animal is a public danger." When Elijah saw armed men taking positions around the perimeter, he made the only choice he could. Grabbing his guitar, he walked directly into the open field where Tornado was circling in panic. Ignoring shouts to stay back, he began playing the Mexican lullaby that had become their private language. Under the harsh spotlights from police cars and the glow of dozens of cell phone cameras, the magnificent black Mustang gradually slowed his frantic movements, ears swiveling toward the familiar music. Breathing heavily, blood streaming from recent wounds, the powerful animal stared at the solitary boy in the field. "Ven aquí, mi amigo," Elijah called softly. "I'm here." As if the entire world held its breath, Tornado walked slowly toward the boy, each step cautious, until he stood directly before him. Elijah reached up and touched the Mustang's muzzle. Before an astonished audience, he wrapped his arms around the horse's powerful neck, whispering words of comfort as silent tears traced paths down his face. The image of Elijah embracing Tornado beneath the harsh spotlights quickly transformed from local sensation to national news. By morning, every major network had picked up the story, their headlines capturing the nation's imagination. The horse whisperer of Colorado, boy's gentle touch tames untamable Mustang, language of love crosses species barrier. In his penthouse suite at the Grand Hotel in Denver, Richard Blackwell watched the coverage with growing horror. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Reporters, investors, and his increasingly panicked public relations team all demanding statements or explanations. "This is a nightmare," said Helen Morris, his chief PR consultant, muting the television where Elijah's tear-streaked face filled the screen. "Social media is exploding. Dire Free Tornado is trending nationwide. PETA is organizing a major protest at the ranch gates for tomorrow." Blackwell swirled the bourbon in his crystal tumbler. "He's just a damn horse. My horse. Legally purchased." "It doesn't matter anymore," Helen replied, scrolling through her tablet. "The public has decided he's a symbol, and that boy, they're calling him everything from a modern-day horse whisperer to a spiritual healer." "Double the offer," Blackwell said suddenly. 4 million. The kid's family lives in a trailer, for God's sake. Everyone has a price. Back in Oak Ridge, Elijah sat at his grandmother's kitchen table, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. The events at the ranch had left him physically and emotionally drained. Abuela Carmen poured him a cup of steaming chamomile tea, her oxygen tank hissing softly beside her. "The news is talking about you, mijo," she said, her weathered hand brushing his hair from his forehead. "Everyone sees now what I've always known. You have a special gift." Elijah stared into his cup. "I'm worried about Tornado. They took him back to the stables after everything. Blackwell won't let this go. He never does." Carmen lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite him. "Mi abuela used to say that some men only understand power. But there are powers beyond money, mijo." A soft knock interrupted them. Ms. Rodriguez stood at their door, her expression grave. "Blackwell's assistant just called the school looking for you. He wants another meeting, today." The midday sun beat down on Blackwell Ranch as Elijah was escorted through the main gates. Unlike his previous visit, the property now resembled an armed camp. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, keeping a growing group of protesters and media at bay. In the distance, Elijah could see the stable where Tornado was being kept. His heart ached at the thought of the Mustang confined again, especially after their breakthrough. Would the horse think Elijah had abandoned him? Would the fragile trust they'd built survive this separation? Blackwell waited in his study, public relations consultants hovering anxiously nearby. When Elijah entered, the millionaire dismissed his entourage with a curt wave. $2 million, he said without preamble, sliding a check across the polished desk. "Double my previous offer. $2 million, and you come here. Calm that damn horse for the cameras, sign a few autographs, and we all move on with our lives." Elijah glanced at the check, the impossible number of zeros blurring before his eyes. $2 million meant security for Abuela, the best medical care available. It meant a chance to hire immigration lawyers for his mother. It meant never having to choose between electricity and food again. "And after?" he asked quietly, looking up to meet Blackwell's calculating gaze. "What happens to Tornado after the cameras leave?" The millionaire's hesitation was brief, but telling. "That's not your concern. The horse is my property." "He's not property," Elijah said, his voice gaining strength. "He's a living being with feelings, with trauma. He remembers everything that's happened to him. The fire that killed his herd, being captured, the methods your trainers used." "Spare me the sentimental drivel," Blackwell interrupted. "It's a horse, not a person. Now, do you want the money or not?" In that moment of silence, looking at Blackwell's impatient expression, Elijah understood with crystal clarity that no amount of money could justify betraying Tornado's trust. The Mustang had opened his heart despite every reason not to. His courage deserved equal courage in return. "No," Elijah said simply, standing up. "I can't be part of hurting him again." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Troy Reynolds and his assistants prepared for one final attempt to break Tornado. Despite his injured arm, Reynolds was determined to prove his methods superior to a boy's gentle touch. His professional reputation hung in the balance. "We're going all in tonight," he told his team, examining the specialized equipment laid out before him. "Maximum restraint, shock conditioning if necessary. By morning, that animal will understand who's in charge, or he'll be too exhausted to fight." Maria, bringing coffee to the men, overheard their plans with mounting horror. The moment she finished her shift, she rushed to the trailer park where Elijah lived. "Vienen a matarlo!" she cried, pounding on his door. "They're going to kill him, boy. Not with bullets, but they will kill his spirit tonight." Reynolds brought even worse equipment. Electric prods, special bits that cause pain with every movement. Elijah felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath his feet. The thought of Tornado subjected to such treatment, after all they'd been through together, was unbearable. "I have to go to him," he said, grabbing his guitar and a flashlight. "They can keep me out during the day, but I know ways into that property they haven't found yet." Night had fully descended when Elijah slipped through a drainage culvert that ran beneath the eastern boundary of Blackwell Ranch. The flashlight beam illuminated his path through the underbrush as he made his way toward the main stables, guided by the distant glow of floodlights. As he drew closer, the sounds reached him first. Tornado's frantic whinnies, men shouting, the crack of a whip. Elijah broke into a run, heart hammering against his ribs. The scene that greeted him in the training arena was worse than he'd imagined. Tornado stood in the center, head secured in a brutal contraption that prevented him from moving it in any direction. Ropes limited his ability to kick or rear. Reynolds circled him with a whip in his good hand, flicking it whenever the Mustang tensed against the saddle on his back. "That's it," Reynolds was saying. "Fight all you want. Eventually you'll learn that fighting only brings more pain." Elijah couldn't bear it another second. He rushed forward, shouting, "Stop! You're hurting him!" Reynolds turned, momentarily startled by the intrusion. "Get that kid out of here," he yelled to his assistants. Two men moved to intercept Elijah, but at that moment, something extraordinary happened. Hearing Elijah's voice, Tornado found new strength in his desperation. With a surge of power that seemed impossible given his restraints, the Mustang reared violently. The movement tore one of the cross ties from its anchor and sent Reynolds sprawling backwards. Chaos erupted. The Mustang, partially freed but still entangled in ropes and the remains of the restraint apparatus, charged blindly around the arena. The men scattered, one assistant thrown against the fence when he failed to move quickly enough. "Shoot it!" Reynolds screamed, clutching his re-injured arm. "That animal is too dangerous to live." One of the ranch hands ran for a rifle kept in the stable office. Elijah, seeing the man's intention, did the only thing he could think of. He stepped directly into the center of the arena, placing himself between the guns and the panicked horse. "Tornado," he called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Estoy aquí, I'm here." The Mustang's frantic circling slowed, despite the equipment still hanging from his body, despite the fresh wounds and the terror. Something in that voice penetrated his panic. His head turned toward Elijah, nostrils flaring to catch his scent. The arena fell silent except for Tornado's heavy breathing and the distant shouts of security guards responding to the commotion. In that fragile moment, Elijah began to play his guitar, the notes of the familiar lullaby rising into the night air. Step by careful step, Tornado approached him, trembling with exhaustion and fear, but drawn by the one voice that had never brought pain. When they were just feet apart, Elijah set down his guitar and raised his hands, showing they were empty of whips or ropes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I should have protected you better." With infinite gentleness, he began removing the cruel apparatus still attached to Tornado's head. The Mustang stood perfectly still, allowing the touch that had only ever brought comfort. As each piece fell away, it seemed to take with it a layer of the animal's fear. By the time Catherine Winters, the pro bono attorney who had agreed to represent Elijah, arrived with Sheriff Wilson and a court order temporarily halting any training of the horse, the transformation was complete. Tornado stood quietly beside Elijah, his proud head resting against the boy's shoulder in a pose of absolute trust. The sheriff stared in disbelief. "I've been around horses my whole life," he said quietly. "Never seen anything like this." Winters stepped forward with the court papers. "Mr. Reynolds, by order of Judge Hamilton, all handling of this animal is suspended pending investigation of potential animal cruelty charges." Reynolds sputtered in outrage, but the presence of several news vans pulling up to the ranch gates, alerted by Maria's frantic calls, effectively silenced further protest. That night, Elijah refused to leave Tornado's side. With permission from the sheriff, who remained to ensure the court order was respected, he stayed in the stable, tending to the Mustang's new wounds. Someone had brought his mother's colorful blanket, and Elijah spread it in the clean straw of a large stall where Tornado could move freely. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the Mustang finally relaxed enough to eat from Elijah's hand, Catherine Winters returned with tea and sandwiches. "We've won a temporary reprieve," she explained, watching the gentle interaction between boy and horse. "But Blackwell's lawyers will fight back hard. Legally, animals are still considered property, and his ownership is documented." "So, what happens now?" Elijah asked, stroking Tornado's neck where the restraints had left angry marks. We build our case, she replied, and hope that the court recognizes that some relationships transcend ordinary legal definitions. As the first light touched the mountains, Elijah led Tornado to the small paddock attached to the stable. The Mustang stepped cautiously into the morning sun, then raised his head to scent the wind coming down from the peaks. For a moment, he looked like the wild creature he had once been, magnificent in his freedom. Whatever happens, Elijah promised softly, I won't let them hurt you again. Catherine's phone buzzed with a message. Her expression tightened as she read it. Blackwell's called a press conference for this morning. He's not giving up. Watching from the ranch's security cameras, Richard Blackwell observed the scene in the paddock, his eyes cold as he moved between the boy, the horse, and the reporters gathering at his gates, and a new plan began to form in his mind, one that would use this touching story for his own benefit, regardless of the cost to the animal or to the immigrant boy who was now becoming an unlikely hero. The image of Elijah and Tornado embraced under the floodlights spread across America with the speed of wildfire in drought season. News anchors from Seattle to Miami narrated the story with hushed reverence. The boy who tamed the untamable, a connection beyond words, the Mustang Whisperer. Within 24 hours, every major network had dispatched crews to the small town of Oak Ridge, transforming the once quiet community into a media circus. Look at this, Catherine Winters said, spreading the morning newspapers across Elijah's kitchen table. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Denver Post all featured the same photograph. Elijah with his arms wrapped around Tornado's powerful neck, the Mustang's eyes half closed in an expression of profound trust. Abuela Carmen shuffled into the kitchen, her oxygen tank trailing behind her. My Elijah, famous, she said, touching the newspaper with trembling fingers. But fame is a dangerous friend, mijo. It comes with hungry shadows. Outside their trailer, a growing cluster of reporters and cameras had gathered. Catherine had been fielding their requests since dawn, protecting Elijah from the sudden intrusion of strangers wanting pieces of his story, and by extension, pieces of him. Blackwell is holding a press conference at 10, Catherine said, checking her watch. We should watch it. On their small television, Richard Blackwell appeared immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, standing before a podium emblazoned with his company logo. Camera flashes illuminated his practiced smile as he addressed the crowd of journalists. This is a horse worth $1 million, he began, his voice steady and authoritative. A significant investment acquired through legitimate channels. I am a businessman, not a charity. While the boy undoubtedly has a way with the animal, that doesn't change the legal reality. The Mustang is my property. Elijah flinched at the word property, his hand unconsciously tightening around his mug of tea. On screen, Blackwell continued. We will continue working with the animal using approved training methods. Mr. Reynolds has been relieved of his duties, but the preparation for the derby will proceed as planned. He's trying to regain control of the narrative, Catherine muttered, scribbling notes, making it sound reasonable, like business as usual. By afternoon, the situation at Blackwell Ranch had escalated. Dozens of protesters gathered at the main gates, holding signs with Tornado's image and slogans like "Freedom for the Wild One" and "Hearts Can't Be Owned." Local police had been called to maintain order as the crowd steadily grew. Catherine received a call that made her eyes widen in surprise. That was Jeremy Blake from Winters & Associates in Denver, she told Elijah. They want to represent you pro bono. Pro bono? Free of charge. They're one of the top firms in Colorado, specializing in environmental and animal welfare cases. She hesitated. Elijah, this could change everything. They have resources I could only dream of. 3 days later, Elijah found himself in a wood-paneled conference room in Denver, surrounded by attorneys in expensive suits. The contrast between their polished appearances and his second-hand clothes made him acutely aware of the worlds colliding in this case. The legal precedent is limited but not non-existent, explained Jeremy Blake, a sharp-featured man with prematurely silver hair. We'll argue that this case transcends normal property considerations because of the extraordinary bond documented between you and the Mustang. Blake projected slides showing legal cases where animals had been granted special consideration. The courts are slowly evolving on this issue. In a recent case in Oregon, a horse was removed from its owner due to evidence of a traumatic relationship. We'll bring in experts to testify about equine psychology and the demonstrated impact of your presence on Tornado's welfare. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Blackwell's legal team made their strategy clear. They would paint Elijah as an inexperienced teenager interfering with professional training methods, potentially endangering himself and others through ignorance. On the morning of the hearing, Elijah arrived at the courthouse to find a sea of supporters lining the steps. Members of the Latino community stood shoulder to shoulder with animal rights activists, environmental groups, and ordinary citizens touched by the story. Many held signs with the same photograph that had captured the nation's attention. "We're here for you, Elijah," called Mrs. Sanchez from his trailer park, waving a small handmade sign in Spanish. Inside the courtroom, Dr. Michael Chen, a renowned specialist in equine behavior from the University of Colorado, took the stand as their first expert witness. "In 30 years of studying horse-human interactions, I've never observed a bond quite like this," Dr. Chen testified, reviewing the footage of Elijah calming Tornado during the storm. "What we're seeing isn't merely a trained response. This is a profound connection based on mutual trust and communication." When cross-examined by Blackwell's attorney, Dr. Chen stood firm. "Mr. Reynolds's methods are increasingly considered outdated and potentially harmful in modern equine behavioral science. They rely on domination rather than cooperation, often creating compliance through fear rather than trust." A professor from Stanford followed, presenting research on stress hormones in horses subjected to different training methods. "The approach this young man has demonstrated represents the future of ethical equine training, while the forceful methods employed by Mr. Reynolds belong to a bygone era we're moving away from for good scientific reasons." As the hearing continued, Catherine received a message that made her pause. "We have a new witness," she whispered to Elijah, a former stable manager from Blackwell's Texas property. The testimony that followed sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. Thomas Wilkins described 3 valuable horses that had died under questionable circumstances at Blackwell's other properties, including one thoroughbred that had been subjected to extreme training methods similar to those Reynolds had attempted with Tornado. "Mr. Blackwell's primary concern was always results, not welfare," Wilkins stated. "When horses failed to perform as expected, the methods would escalate until they either complied or—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. During a recess, Catherine brought more unexpected news. "Blackwell's ex-wife has contacted us. She wants to testify about his treatment of animals during their marriage." Victoria Blackwell, elegant and composed, described her former husband's sadistic pleasure in dominating creatures weaker than himself. "He once had a dog put down simply because it wouldn't obey instantly," she testified. "Richard believes anything can be broken into submission, and he enjoys the process." Blackwell's face remained impassive during her testimony, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. The community's support continued to grow throughout the proceedings. The local restaurant owners provided free lunches for Elijah and his legal team. Volunteers took turns sitting with Abuela Carmen so Elijah wouldn't worry about her being alone. Ms. Rodriguez organized transportation for community members who wanted to attend the hearings but lacked vehicles. Meanwhile, at Blackwell Ranch, a small team of veterinarians approved by the court monitored Tornado daily. The Mustang had become increasingly agitated since being separated from Elijah, refusing food and pacing his enclosure restlessly. The court had permitted Elijah one supervised visit midweek, during which the change in the horse's demeanor was immediate and dramatic, from anxious vigilance to calm attentiveness the moment the boy appeared. Despite the mounting evidence of their special bond, Judge Hamilton remained constrained by existing law. During closing arguments, he expressed his frustration openly. "While this court is moved by the extraordinary connection demonstrated between the minor plaintiff and the animal in question, I am bound by the legal framework that defines animals as property. Unless there is evidence of ongoing cruelty, The court has limited grounds to interfere with legitimate ownership rights. The words fell like stones in Elijah's stomach. Catherine squeezed his hand reassuringly, but her expression revealed her own disappointment. They had made a compelling moral case, but the legal basis remained shaky. As both sides prepared for the judge's final ruling, scheduled for the following morning, an unexpected figure requested to address the court. Thomas Reeves, a mid-level bureaucrat from the Department of Public Lands, the agency responsible for managing wild horse populations. "Your Honor, I've come forward voluntarily after reviewing the case file," Reeves began, nervously adjusting his glasses. "I believe there are irregularities in the documentation regarding the capture and sale of the Mustang known as Tornado." The courtroom fell silent as Reeves produced a file of documents. According to these records, the Mustang was captured in Sector 47B of the Sweetwater Basin. However, this map clearly shows that area falls within a protected zone where capture operations are prohibited under federal statute. Blackwell leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney as Reeves continued. Furthermore, the documentation was altered after the fact to disguise this violation. The horse was captured illegally, making the subsequent sale to Mr. Blackwell invalid under federal law. Technically speaking, this Mustang remains the property of the Federal Wild Horse Protection Program. Judge Hamilton studied the documents with a furrowed brow. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Reeves. Are you prepared to testify to their authenticity under oath?" "I am, Your Honor. I've also submitted these findings to the Office of the Inspector General." Blackwell's legal team requested an immediate recess, which the judge granted. Catherine turned to Elijah, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "This changes everything. If the purchase was illegal, Blackwell's claim of ownership collapses entirely." When court reconvened the following morning, Blackwell's lead attorney requested a private conference with the judge and opposing counsel. For nearly an hour, Elijah waited anxiously in the corridor while the attorneys negotiated behind closed doors. Catherine emerged, looking both triumphant and wary. "Blackwell wants to make a deal," she explained. "He's realized he's cornered, facing potential federal charges for receiving illegally captured wildlife, plus the PR nightmare that would follow. He's proposing a settlement." Later that afternoon, in a hastily arranged press conference on the courthouse steps, Richard Blackwell stood before the cameras with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Elijah stood awkwardly beside him, Catherine's steadying hand on his shoulder. "After careful reflection on the extraordinary bond between man and animal that we've all witnessed," Blackwell announced, "I've decided to donate both the Mustang and 10 acres of my property for the creation of the Torres Equine Recovery Center." Cameras flashed as he continued, "I believe young Elijah has a gift that should be nurtured. This center will be a legacy for our community, a place where troubled horses and troubled humans can heal together." What Blackwell didn't mention were the clauses in the agreement that protected him from prosecution and guaranteed enormous tax benefits for his philanthropic donation. The elaborate ceremony unfolded on the manicured lawns of Blackwell Ranch, a spectacle designed for maximum publicity. White tents gleamed in the afternoon sun, their sides emblazoned with the newly created Torres Equine Recovery Center logo, a silhouette of a boy and horse facing each other, separated by a narrow space that suggested both connection and independence. Camera crews from local and national networks positioned themselves strategically, capturing the seemingly benevolent transformation of Richard Blackwell from ruthless businessman to philanthropic visionary. Elijah stood uncomfortably at the edge of the stage that had been erected for the occasion, tugging at the collar of the new button-down shirt Catherine had insisted he wear. Beside him, Tornado shifted restlessly, the unfamiliar sounds and smells of the gathered crowd causing his ears to flick nervously back and forth. "It's okay," Elijah murmured in Spanish, one hand resting lightly on the Mustang's shoulder. "We just need to get through this, and then they'll leave us alone." Tornado's response was subtle, a slight lowering of his head, a deep breath that seemed to synchronize with Elijah's own. The horse hadn't left the boy's side since their reunion, following him with the devotion of a shadow, as if afraid that another separation might be permanent. Richard Blackwell approached the podium, his tailored suit impeccable, his smile practiced to perfection, as he raised a hand to quiet the applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," he began, voice smooth as polished stone. "After profound reflection on the extraordinary bond between man and animal that we've all witnessed, I am proud to announce the creation of the Torres Equine Recovery Center." The speech continued, carefully constructed phrases about healing, connection, and community legacy, flowing with rehearsed sincerity. Watching from the side, Ms. Rodriguez leaned toward Doc Peterson, her voice barely above a whisper. "He looks like a prince captured and displayed by his conqueror," she said, nodding toward Elijah's rigid posture and unnatural clothing. "This isn't a celebration. It's a victory parade for Blackwell." Doc nodded grimly. "Notice he keeps saying, 'I created' and 'my vision,' already rewriting history to make himself the hero instead of the villain." When the speech concluded, Blackwell gestured grandly for Elijah to join him. "And now, a few words from the young man whose special connection inspired this project." Elijah approached reluctantly, Tornado following close behind. The microphone stood too tall, and Blackwell made no move to adjust it, forcing the boy to stand on tiptoes to speak. "Thank you," Elijah began simply. "This center isn't about me. It's about understanding that animals have feelings and memories just like people. Tornado taught me that sometimes the strongest souls are the most wounded ones, and healing happens through patience, not force." His gaze drifted to the Mustang, who stood attentively beside him, and his voice strengthened. "What we're building here isn't just for horses like Tornado. It's for anyone who needs to remember that connection doesn't require words, and that trust has to be earned, not demanded." The sincerity in his unpolished speech drew genuine applause, noticeably warmer than the response to Blackwell's practiced delivery. The businessman's smile tightened imperceptibly as he quickly reclaimed the microphone, steering the ceremony toward the ribbon-cutting photo opportunity. Afterward, as guests mingled under the tents, Catherine Winters pulled Elijah aside, concern evident in her expression. "We need to review these documents before you sign anything," she said, gesturing to the thick stack of papers that Blackwell's attorneys had presented. "Some of these clauses are troubling." They retreated to a quiet corner where Catherine spread the documents on a table. "This one gives Blackwell veto power over all major decisions regarding the center. This one requires his approval for any public statements about Tornado. And this..." She frowned deeply. "This would give him rights to use your name and image in perpetuity for promotional purposes." "Do I have to sign them?" Elijah asked quietly. "Not in this form. We'll negotiate better terms." Catherine's expression softened. "Don't worry. The public support you've gained gives us leverage. Blackwell knows that forcing unfair terms would damage his carefully constructed image as your benevolent mentor." Later that afternoon, Blackwell approached Elijah as he stood at the edge of the property, Tornado grazing peacefully nearby. The cameras had departed, most guests had left, and the businessman's demeanor shifted subtly in their absence. "You have a raw talent, boy," he said, hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the land. "Rough, unpolished, but undeniable. I can help you shape it into something valuable." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied cautiously. "What you don't have is business sense," Blackwell continued. "That's where I come in. Together we could turn this little center into a global brand. Imagine franchises across the country, books, maybe even a television series." Elijah stroked Tornado's neck, finding comfort in the warm solidity of the horse. "I'm not really interested in becoming a brand, Mr. Blackwell. I just want to help horses that have been through trauma." "That's because you think small," Blackwell said, his tone sharpening slightly. "You could help thousands of horses instead of dozens. You could bring your mother back from Mexico with the money we'd make. But that requires vision and commitment to my guidance." The mention of his mother struck like a physical blow, but Elijah maintained his composure. "I'll think about what you said." "Do that," Blackwell nodded curtly. "Remember, I'm offering you a mentorship most people would kill for. Don't waste it with sentimentality." The following morning, Elijah, Catherine, and Doc Peterson made their first official visit to the 10 acres that would become the Torres Equine Recovery Center. The reality was sobering. The land, while legally transferred, was located in the most remote corner of Blackwell's vast property, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that became nearly impassable when wet. "Of course he gave us the least valuable parcel," Doc muttered, kicking at the hard-packed soil. "Far from water lines, no existing structures, poor drainage on the western side." Catherine made notes on her clipboard. "We can work with this. The isolation actually provides the quiet environment these traumatized horses will need. We'll need to budget for water tanks and proper drainage systems." Elijah wandered the perimeter with Tornado, getting a feel for the land. Despite its challenges, something about the open space with its backdrop of distant mountains filled him with quiet hope. This land, however imperfect, represented possibility. That evening, the Oak Ridge Community Center overflowed with people responding to Maria's hastily organized meeting. Families from the predominantly Latino east side of town sat alongside ranchers, teachers, and small business owners. "My cousin works construction. He can help with the stable foundations," offered one man, standing to be recognized. "The women's circle at my church will organize weekly meal deliveries while you're building," added Mrs. Gonzalez, the bakery owner. "I teach architecture at the community college," said a professor Elijah had never met. "My students need real-world projects. We could design the facilities as our semester assignment." One by one, people stood to offer skills, materials, and time. Maria coordinated it all, writing names and contributions on a large whiteboard. By meeting's end, they had the beginnings of a construction plan that would stretch their limited resources through community involvement. "Sí, mijo?" Abuela Carmen whispered, squeezing Elijah's hand. "This is the true power Blackwell will never understand. People coming together for something they believe in." Over the following weeks, the contrast between Blackwell's vision and Elijah's became increasingly apparent. The businessman arrived one morning with architectural plans for elaborate facilities, a massive show barn with viewing galleries, luxury guest accommodations, and a gift shop prominently featuring Tornado merchandise. "This will put us on the map," he explained, spreading the renderings across a folding table at the construction site. "High-end clients will pay premium prices for the Tornado experience. We'll have them stay for a week, learn your methods, take photos with the famous Mustang." Elijah studied the plans with growing dismay. "This looks more like a resort than a rehabilitation center." "It can be both," Blackwell insisted. "Profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive." Later that day, Elijah shared his concerns with Catherine and Doc as they reviewed the community-designed plans. Simple, functional facilities prioritizing the animal's well-being over human comfort. "He wants to turn Tornado into a circus attraction," Elijah said, frustration evident in his voice. "People paying to take selfies with him, merchandise with his image. That's exactly the kind of environment that would terrify him." Doc nodded grimly. "Blackwell sees dollar signs, not a traumatized animal who needs peace and stability." The conflict came to a head 3 weeks into construction, when Blackwell arrived with a group of potential investors, wealthy business people from Denver who spoke enthusiastically about maximizing return on investment and leveraging the Tornado brand. As they toured the partially completed facilities, one investor pointed to the simple open-air design of the planned rehabilitation paddocks. "This space could be enclosed and climate-controlled. Add some stadium seating around the perimeter, and you could charge admission for training demonstrations." Blackwell nodded approvingly. "Excellent suggestion, Charles. We'll add that to the revised plans." "No," Elijah said quietly but firmly, drawing surprised looks from the group. "The horses need to see the sky and feel the wind. It's part of their healing." Blackwell's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Elijah is still learning about business operations," he told the investors smoothly. "We value his input on the horse psychology aspects, but naturally, the business decisions rest with the experienced team." That night, a sudden spring storm swept through the valley, bringing torrential rain that turned the construction site to mud. Concerned about Tornado, who was temporarily housed in an expensive but claustrophobic stall Blackwell had insisted on building to protect our primary asset. Elijah drove out to the property through the downpour. He found the Mustang in obvious distress, pacing the confined space, his powerful body trembling with each thunder crack. Without hesitation, Elijah opened the stall door, leading Tornado out into the rain-soaked field where the horse could move freely. Together, they stood in the storm, Elijah's hand resting on the Mustang's wet neck, both finding comfort in the shared experience of wild elements. The following morning, Blackwell arrived for a scheduled meeting with potential sponsors to find Tornado muddy but calm, grazing contentedly in the open field rather than contained in the showcase stall where visitors expected to find him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, gesturing toward the dirty horse that was supposed to be the centerpiece of his presentation. "These people have flown in from Chicago to see a magnificent wild Mustang, not a mud-covered pasture ornament." "He was panicking in that stall during the storm," Elijah explained. "Confined spaces trigger his trauma from capture and transport." "Then you should have stayed with him in the stall," Blackwell snapped. "Animals adapt, they learn." Something in Elijah, perhaps strengthened by weeks of witnessing Tornado's gradual healing through freedom and respect, refused to bend. As the sponsors watched with interest, he addressed them directly. "At this center, we don't break horses or force them to adapt to our convenience. We build relationships based on understanding their needs and traumas. Horses that have experienced profound fear, like Tornado, heal through having choices restored to them, not through having more control imposed." His voice grew stronger as he continued, passion evident in every word. "The traumatized horses we rehabilitate here will help traumatized people heal too. Veterans with PTSD, children from difficult backgrounds, survivors of abuse, they recognize authenticity. They know when something is being done for show versus genuine connection." Blackwell's face flushed with barely contained fury, but the sponsors were nodding thoughtfully, several exchanging impressed glances. One woman, the representative of a veterans foundation, stepped forward. "I'd like to hear more about your approach, Elijah. My organization works with combat veterans who might benefit from exactly the kind of authentic healing environment you're describing." After the visitors had departed, several leaving with promises of support independent of Blackwell's involvement, the businessman cornered Elijah near the half-built stable. "You deliberately undermined me," he said, voice dangerously quiet. "After everything I've done for you, you humiliated me in front of important contacts." "I just told them the truth about our methods," Elijah replied, striving to keep his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Our methods?" Blackwell laughed coldly. "You forget that this center exists through my generosity. This land, that horse, even your name on that sign, it all can disappear with one call to my lawyers. So boy, you will follow my vision or you want to go back to your trailer with your sick grandmother and without your precious Mustang." Blackwell's ultimatum hung in the air like the acrid smell before a lightning strike. Elijah stood frozen, the magnitude of the threat seeping into his bones. Everything he had worked for, Tornado's trust, the center's vision, a future where animals weren't merely possessions, could vanish with a single phone call. He walked home slowly that evening, shoulders heavy with the impossible choice. The lights of his grandmother's trailer glowed dimly through the gathering dusk, a beacon of simplicity and honesty in a world suddenly complicated by power games. When he pushed open the door, the scene inside stopped him short. Doc Peterson sat at their small kitchen table, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Ms. Rodriguez stood by the window, talking quietly on her phone. Maria from the ranch kitchen was arranging homemade tamales on a plate, while several other familiar faces from the community filled the tiny living space. Abuela Carmen looked up from her rocking chair, her oxygen tank hissing softly beside her. "You look like you carry the weight of mountains, mijo." "Blackwell threatened to take everything away," Elijah said simply, collapsing onto the worn sofa. "The land, the center, Tornado." "We know," Doc Peterson replied, sliding a mug of coffee toward him. "We've been expecting this." Men like Blackwell don't surrender control easily. Ms. Rodriguez ended her call and joined them. That's why we've been preparing. Preparing? Elijah looked around the room, noticing for the first time the folders and papers spread across every available surface. Catherine Winters has been researching the legal implications of Blackwell's public donation, Doc explained. The media coverage, the press conference, the public announcements, they create what lawyers call a promissory estoppel. In simple terms, he made a public commitment that would cause significant harm if revoked. Maria sat beside Elijah, her warm hand covering his. And we've been documenting everything, mijo. Every visitor to the ranch, every statement Blackwell made to reporters, every donation that's come in based on his promises. But that's not all, Ms. Rodriguez added, her eyes gleaming with quiet determination. We've also been looking into the community's historical relationship with that land. Doc Peterson nodded. Before Blackwell bought that ranch 2 years ago, that particular parcel, the one he generously donated, was traditionally used by local Latino families for gatherings. It's why there's an old stone fire pit near the oak grove. The previous owner, old Jim Hendricks, had an informal agreement with the community for decades. Elijah's mind struggled to process this unexpected show of support. For 3 years since his mother's deportation, he had carried his burdens alone, believing isolation was the price of survival. The sight of his small living room filled with people who had been working behind the scenes to protect him was overwhelming. "We're not letting Blackwell bully you, Elijah," Ms. Rodriguez said firmly. "This isn't just about one horse or one boy anymore. It's about whether wealth gives someone the right to control everything and everyone around them." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the mountains sharp against the brightening sky. Elijah arrived at the center's construction site to find not just the regular volunteers, but dozens of additional community members. They stood in a loose semicircle at the property entrance, calm but resolute. Confusion gave way to understanding when 3 black SUVs approached, Blackwell in the lead vehicle with what appeared to be security personnel following behind. The millionaire's face darkened when he saw the gathered crowd. "What's this supposed to be?" he demanded as he emerged from his vehicle, gesturing toward the people blocking the entrance. "These are members of the community who support the center's mission," Elijah replied, finding unexpected steadiness in his voice. "They're here to help with construction today." Blackwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't play games with me, boy. I've come to implement necessary changes to the operation. My men will be relocating the Mustang to the main training facility where we can properly prepare him for public appearances." As if sensing the threat, Tornado appeared at the edge of the paddock, his head high, nostrils flaring as he watched the confrontation unfold. Unlike the terrified animal who had arrived months before, he showed no panic, only a wary alertness that mirrored the community's stance. "Mr. Blackwell," Doc Peterson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. "We've reviewed the donation agreement carefully. Any attempt to remove Tornado or fundamentally alter the center's purpose would constitute a breach of contract, not to mention a public relations disaster." Maria moved to stand beside Elijah, her normally gentle expression hardened with resolve. "My grandfather helped build this ranch when your father was still counting pennies in Texas, senor. We have witnessed your promises on television and in newspapers. The world is watching." Blackwell's security team shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for a confrontation with grandmothers, teachers, and local business owners, instead of the easy intimidation they had expected. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of a news van from the Denver station, its satellite dish visible over the rise in the road. Ms. Rodriguez smiled innocently when Blackwell shot her a suspicious glance. "I may have mentioned to Channel 7 that the famous Tornado would be participating in a community work day," she explained. "They're doing a follow-up feature on the miracle of Oak Ridge. Wonderful publicity for your philanthropic efforts, don't you think?" Trapped by his own carefully cultivated public image, Blackwell retreated, though not without a parting threat delivered under his breath to Elijah. "This isn't over, boy. No one makes Richard Blackwell look foolish and gets away with it." As the SUVs departed, leaving only dust clouds in their wake, The tension broke. Cheers erupted from the gathered community, people embracing and patting Elijah on the back. Tornado approached the fence, ears forward with curiosity rather than pinned back in fear. "Look at him," Maria whispered to Doc Peterson. "Even the horse stands taller today." The confrontation at the center entrance transformed what had been a local dispute into a symbol of something larger. By evening, news of the community shield protecting the center had spread throughout the region. More volunteers arrived the following day, bringing additional supplies, food, and expertise. Catherine Winters organized a rotation schedule ensuring the center had a continuous presence, even during overnight hours. "Blackwell operates in shadows," she explained. "We're removing those shadows." Elijah, for his part, found himself unexpectedly strengthened by the community's support. Where he had once moved through the world trying to remain invisible, he now stood at the center of a movement that valued exactly what made him different: his quiet persistence, his capacity for empathy across species boundaries, his refusal to see power as the only measure of worth. 3 days after the confrontation, Maria arrived at the center, breathless with news. Blackwell received phone calls from major donors threatening to withdraw support from his other projects if he interferes with the center, she reported. "My cousin works for his receptionist. She overheard everything." Doc Peterson nodded thoughtfully. Public opinion is powerful currency, even for a man who worships the dollar. Blackwell can't afford to be seen bullying a teenager and a rescue horse, not when he's trying to secure environmental permits for his new development on the North Ridge. That evening, as twilight settled over the mountains, Elijah sat with Tornado in the open meadow. The Mustang grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally raising his head to check Elijah's position. No longer from fear, but from the comfortable awareness that comes with trust. "We're not alone anymore," Elijah told him softly in Spanish. "For so long it was just me and Abuela, trying to survive each day. Now," he gestured toward the half-built center where community members were finishing the day's work, calling good nights as they departed in small groups, promises to return tomorrow hanging in the air. Tornado approached, nudging Elijah's shoulder with his velvety muzzle. The horse's eyes, once wild with terror, now held a steady calmness that spoke of gradual healing. Not complete. Elijah doubted the Mustang would ever fully forget the trauma of the fire, the capture, the cruel training attempts, but enough to allow moments of peace. As darkness deepened, the silhouette of a car appeared on the access road, headlights cutting through the gathering shadows. Elijah tensed briefly, wondering if Blackwell had returned despite the community's vigilance. Tornado, sensing his unease, moved closer, his warm breath ruffling Elijah's hair. The car stopped at a respectful distance. A single figure emerged, walking slowly toward them with a familiar gait. "Sheriff Wilson," Elijah greeted, surprised to see the county's top law enforcement officer visiting alone after hours. The sheriff nodded, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, aware of the Mustang's watchful presence. "Evening, Elijah. Thought I'd stop by, see how things are progressing." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't a routine visit. "Is something wrong?" Elijah asked. Sheriff Wilson hesitated. "Not wrong exactly, but you should know. Blackwell was in my office this afternoon asking about your mother's deportation case." Cold dread washed through Elijah. "What about it?" "He claims to have information suggesting she was involved with drug traffickers before her deportation. Says he's considering bringing it to the proper authorities unless certain community disruptions at his property cease." The implication was clear. Another threat. This one aimed at what Elijah held most precious: his mother's reputation, her chance of ever returning. "That's a lie," Elijah said, his voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "My mother cleaned hotel rooms and worked at the processing plant. She never did anything illegal." Sheriff Wilson nodded. "I know that, son. I was deputy when the ICE raid happened. Your mother was caught in a sweep, nothing more." He sighed heavily. "But Blackwell has connections in federal agencies. He could make things difficult, plant doubts in her file." As the sheriff departed with a promise to keep an eye on things, Elijah remained in the meadow, a storm of emotions raging inside him. Tornado sensed his distress, staying close, occasionally lowering his great head to touch Elijah's shoulder, offering wordless comfort. Later that night, after most volunteers had gone home, Elijah sat alone in the partially constructed stable, the weight of Blackwell's new threat crushing his earlier confidence. How could he stand against a man willing to destroy his mother's reputation? What price would be too high to protect her chance of return? Lost in his dark thoughts, he barely noticed when Tornado entered the open building. The Mustang moved with purpose, nudging Elijah insistently, tugging at his sleeve with gentle teeth. "What is it?" Elijah asked, rising to follow as the horse led him purposefully toward the far boundary of their property, a section they rarely visited where the land sloped down toward a small creek. Tornado stopped at the fence line, pawing at the ground and tossing his head toward something beyond. Following the horse's gaze, Elijah noticed a strange discoloration in the water of the creek, an oily sheen catching the moonlight. Nearby, a weathered sign read, "Restricted area, no entry," in faded letters. Curious, despite his troubled mind, Elijah climbed the fence, following the creek a short distance onto Blackwell's main property. The smell hit him first, a chemical stench that burned his nostrils. Then he saw it, drums half hidden among the bushes, one tipped over with viscous liquid seeping into the water. In a dilapidated shed nearby, he found stacks of documents, environmental surveys, chemical analyses, and handwritten notes detailing a deliberate contamination plan. The goal, spelled out in Blackwell's distinctive handwriting, was to devalue neighboring properties by poisoning their water supply, making them cheaper to acquire for his expansion plans. While observing a car approaching in the distance, Elijah realized that Tornado had not merely led him to a discovery. The horse had given him the leverage needed for the final confrontation with the man who had threatened everything they were building. Elijah clutched the damning documents against his chest, heart pounding as headlights swept through the trees. The evidence in his hands was explosive. Blackwell's deliberate poisoning of groundwater to force neighboring ranchers into selling their land at desperate prices. He quickly photographed several pages with his phone before returning everything exactly as he'd found it, then slipped away through the underbrush, Tornado's warning neigh from across the fence guiding him back to safety. By morning, Elijah's discovery had transformed his despair into resolve, though uncertainty still gnawed at him. Contaminating water supplies was a federal crime with serious consequences. The evidence could destroy Blackwell completely, perhaps more thoroughly than the Millionaire had threatened to destroy Elijah's mother's reputation. Catherine Winters examined the photographs in the center's makeshift office, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This is devastating, Elijah. Deliberate environmental contamination at this scale is criminal, with no possibility of settlement. We're talking about prison time." "What should we do?" Elijah asked, watching Tornado through the window as the Mustang moved with newfound confidence around his paddock. "Legally, we must report this to the EPA immediately," Catherine replied, organizing the images into a folder on her laptop. "This affects public safety, wildlife, the entire watershed." Doc Peterson, who had joined them after Elijah's urgent call, shook his head slowly. "Blackwell won't go down without a fight. He'll claim these were planted, or that some employee acted without his knowledge. His signature is on the contamination plan," Catherine countered, "and the handwriting on those notes matches documents I've seen during discovery." Elijah remained silent, struggling with the moral weight of his decision. Using this information would protect the center and clear his mother's name, but wielding it as a weapon went against everything he tried to teach at the center. That intimidation and force were never the path to true resolution. "I need time to think," he said finally. Alone with Tornado later that afternoon, Elijah brushed the Mustang's gleaming coat, finding comfort in the rhythmic motion. "What would you do?" he asked softly in Spanish. "Is destroying him the only way to stop him?" Tornado turned his great head, eyes meeting Elijah's with that unnerving intelligence that had first connected them. The horse had taught Elijah so much about trust, how it couldn't be forced, only earned through consistent respect and understanding. Could those same principles apply to someone like Blackwell, who saw the world only through the lens of dominance? When darkness fell, Elijah made his decision. He called Blackwell's private number, provided reluctantly by Sheriff Wilson, who understood the gravity of the situation. "I need to meet with you," Elijah said simply when the millionaire answered. "Alone, tomorrow morning at the center." "I'm a busy man," Blackwell replied coldly. "Whatever this is about." "It's about the drums by the East Creek," Elijah interrupted, "and the documents in the shed." The silence that followed told Elijah everything. Finally, Blackwell spoke, his voice carefully controlled. 9 o'clock. Don't waste my time." The morning dawned clear and crisp, sunlight setting the autumn-touched trees ablaze with color. Elijah stood at the center of the paddock where he had first connected with Tornado during the storm, the Mustang grazing peacefully nearby. When Blackwell's Range Rover appeared on the access road, the horse raised his head, nostrils flaring, but showed none of the panic that would have overwhelmed him months before. Blackwell arrived alone as requested, though Elijah suspected security waited nearby. The businessman's face was a mask of cold calculation as he approached, stopping at the paddock fence. "Let's make this quick," he said, glancing distastefully at his Italian leather shoes already gathering dust. "What exactly do you think you know?" Instead of answering directly, Elijah walked toward him, Tornado following a few paces behind, not from fear but choice. "Did you know Mustangs create family bonds that last their entire lives?" he asked. "When Tornado was captured, he lost his entire herd in that fire. Everything that gave his life meaning and security disappeared overnight." Blackwell's expression tightened with impatience. "I didn't come here for a wildlife lecture." "When I first met him," Elijah continued as if Blackwell hadn't spoken, "he was consumed by fear and trauma. He attacked because he expected to be attacked. He trusted no one because trust had only brought him pain." He paused, looking directly into Blackwell's eyes. "I wonder what happened to make you see the world the same way." "This is absurd," Blackwell snapped. "If you brought me here to psychoanalyze me—" "I know about the chemical dumping," Elijah interrupted quietly. "I have photos of the documents, your signature, your handwritten notes about contaminating the watershed to force the Rodriguez family and the Hendersons to sell." The color drained from Blackwell's face, replaced quickly by a calculating anger. "You broke into private property. Those photos would never be admissible." "I'm not threatening you, Mr. Blackwell," Elijah said, surprising both of them with his calmness. "I'm not going to blackmail you or demand anything." Confusion replaced anger in the millionaire's eyes. "Then what is this about?" "I'm going to give the evidence to the EPA regardless of what happens here today," Elijah stated. "What you did is wrong and people could get sick from that water. But I wanted to offer you something first." "Offer me something?" Blackwell's laugh was sharp with disbelief. "What could you possibly offer me?" "A different way forward," Elijah replied simply. "Not as enemies destroying each other, but as partners building something better. We start by cleaning up that creek and protecting the land you've poisoned. Then we expand the center's work to include environmental restoration alongside horse rehabilitation." Blackwell stared at him, genuine confusion evident in his expression. "Why would you offer partnership instead of using this to destroy me? After everything I've done?" Elijah glanced at Tornado, who had moved closer, his warm breath visible in the cool morning air. "Because breaking spirits doesn't heal them. Because people, like horses, can learn new ways of being in the world if given the chance." Before Blackwell could respond, Elijah's phone rang. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of fear through him. "Elijah?" It was Mrs. Vasquez, their neighbor, who helped with Abuela. "Carmen had an attack this morning. The ambulance just took her to Oak Ridge Memorial. They said to come quickly." The world seemed to tilt beneath Elijah's feet. "I'll be right there," he managed, ending the call with trembling fingers. "My grandmother," he explained to Blackwell, already moving toward his battered pickup truck. "She's in the hospital." Something shifted in Blackwell's expression. a momentary crack in the impenetrable facade. "Go," he said simply. "We'll continue this another time." The next hours passed in a blur of sterile corridors, beeping monitors, and the terrifying sight of Abuela Carmen looking smaller than ever beneath hospital blankets, an oxygen mask obscuring her face. Her emphysema had worsened suddenly, the doctor explained, her lungs struggling to function after years of damage. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Patel assured him. "But she's very weak. These next 24 hours will be critical." Elijah sat beside her bed, holding her papery hand, remembering all the times she had been his only anchor in the storm of loss and uncertainty. The thought of losing her too was unbearable. He was vaguely aware of Ms. Rodriguez arriving with food he couldn't eat, of Doc Peterson stopping by after his shift at the animal clinic, of Maria organizing a prayer circle in the hospital waiting room. The community that had rallied around the center now gathered to support its young founder in his personal crisis. As evening settled over the hospital, Elijah dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair beside Carmen's bed. The sound of the door opening roused him, and he looked up expecting to see a nurse. Instead, Richard Blackwell stood in the doorway, looking strangely out of place in the modest county hospital. "How is she?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Stable, but critical," Elijah replied, too exhausted for hostility. "The doctor says her lungs are barely functioning." Blackwell nodded, stepping closer to look at the frail woman connected to various monitors and tubes. "I've made some calls," he said after a moment. "Dr. Emmanuel Cortez from Denver Memorial will be here tomorrow morning. He's the leading pulmonary specialist in the state." Elijah stared at him, confused by this unexpected intervention. "Why would you do that?" Blackwell hesitated, his gaze fixed on Carmen's face. "My mother died of emphysema when I was 20, he said finally. "The last months were difficult. No specialists were available in the small Texas town where we lived. No treatments beyond the basics." He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the revelation. "Dr. Cortez owes me a favor. He'll ensure she gets the best care possible." Before Elijah could respond, Blackwell turned to leave. At the door he paused. "About the contamination, I've already contacted an environmental remediation company. They'll begin work tomorrow. Whatever else happens between us, that situation will be addressed immediately." For 3 days, Elijah barely left the hospital as specialists consulted on Abuela's case and new treatments were administered. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she finally opened her eyes properly, her gaze finding Elijah's tired face. "You look terrible, mijo," she whispered behind her oxygen mask, her voice barely audible but her spirit unmistakably present. Relief washed through him like a physical force. "You scared me, Abuela. It takes more than bad lungs to keep me from seeing you finish what you've started," she replied, squeezing his hand weakly. "The nurses told me about all the people in the waiting room, and about the rich man who brought the famous doctor." Elijah nodded, still processing Blackwell's unexpected intervention. "It's complicated." Carmen's eyes, clouded with cataracts but sharp with wisdom, studied his face. "Maybe he sees in you what the Mustang saw. Someone who offers understanding instead of judgment." When Elijah finally returned to the center after Carmen stabilized, he found significant changes underway. The contaminated creek was surrounded by workers in hazmat suits, specialized equipment extracting and filtering the polluted soil and water. Near the main construction site, new lumber had arrived along with additional volunteers. Most surprisingly, Blackwell's architectural team was revising plans according to Elijah's original vision: simple, functional facilities that prioritized animal welfare over luxury. Tornado greeted Elijah with gentle nudges, having been well cared for by Maria and Doc during his absence. The Mustang's behavior around others had continued to evolve, still cautious, but no longer dominated by fear, allowing certain trusted individuals to approach under specific conditions. As sunset painted the mountains gold, Elijah sat with Catherine on the half-finished porch of what would become the center's main building. "Blackwell requested a meeting with the EPA himself," she explained. "He's taking full responsibility for the contamination. and has proposed an expanded cleanup that includes the entire watershed. "Do you think people can change that fundamentally?" Elijah asked, watching Tornado move freely in the paddock, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I think when someone sees themselves clearly for the first time, truly sees the consequences of their actions, change becomes possible." She smiled slightly. "You gave Blackwell something his money couldn't buy, the chance to be better than his worst self." With evidence of Blackwell's environmental crimes in hand, Elijah solicits a private meeting with the millionaire, not to threaten him as expected, but to offer something Blackwell never anticipated, a chance at genuine redemption through partnership in environmental restoration, alongside the horse rehabilitation work. "I don't want to destroy you, Mr. Blackwell, as you tried to destroy me. I want to propose a true partnership, where we can both transform our stories of pain into something better, starting with cleaning up that creek and protecting the lands you contaminated." The morning after Elijah's confrontation with Blackwell at the creek, an unusual calm settled over the Torres Equine Recovery Center. The confrontation he had anticipated, one of threats and counterattacks, had transformed into something unexpected. Blackwell had received Elijah's offer of redemption, not with the dismissive arrogance everyone expected, but with a disarming silence that suggested, perhaps for the first time, genuine consideration. Elijah arrived early, the dew still fresh on the grass as he made his way to Tornado's paddock. The Mustang approached immediately, nickering softly in greeting, a sound that still surprised Elijah every time he heard it. 3 months ago, this magnificent animal had been consumed by terror and rage, incapable of producing any vocalization that wasn't born of fear. Now, he communicated with a growing vocabulary of gentle sounds that Elijah had learned to interpret as precisely as any spoken language. "Buenos dias, hermoso," Elijah murmured, offering his palm for the familiar greeting of warm breath and soft muzzle. "We have important decisions today." Tornado's ears flicked forward, attentive to the cadence of Elijah's voice if not the specific words. Something in the boy's tone communicated his uncertainty, prompting the Mustang to press his head gently against Elijah's chest, a gesture of reassurance that had developed between them during moments of shared anxiety. The sound of tires on gravel announced Blackwell's arrival, earlier than expected. Tornado's head came up sharply, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of the man who had once represented the greatest threat to his freedom. Instead of retreating to the far end of the paddock as he would have weeks before, the Mustang held his ground beside Elijah, watchful but not panicked. "Progress," Elijah whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "See, you're getting braver every day." Blackwell approached alone, his usual entourage noticeably absent. Gone was the immaculate business suit, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt that made him appear strangely vulnerable. He stopped at a respectful distance from the fence, acknowledging both Elijah and Tornado with a slight nod. "I've been thinking about your proposal," he said without preamble. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Elijah asked, continuing to stroke Tornado's neck, finding his own calm in the rhythmic motion. "Demands, threats, leverage." Blackwell's gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "That's how the world works in my experience." "Maybe that's how your world works," Elijah replied. "But there are other ways to exist." Blackwell studied the boy and horse, something unfamiliar flickering in his expression. "You genuinely believe that, don't you? Even after everything, you still think there's a better path than mutual destruction." "I learned it from him." Elijah nodded toward Tornado. "When I first met him, he had every reason to hate humans forever. We had taken everything from him, his freedom, his family, his dignity, but he was still capable of giving another chance, of finding trust again." A silence stretched between them, filled only with the soft sounds of Tornado's breathing and the distant calls of meadowlarks. When Blackwell finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar hesitation. "The environmental remediation team starts work tomorrow. It will take months, but they'll restore the watershed completely. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I've also instructed my attorneys to withdraw any objections to your mother's immigration case. The paperwork citing exceptional and extremely unusual hardship for her return has already been filed. Elijah's hand stilled on Tornado's neck, disbelief momentarily robbing him of words. Why? He finally managed. Consider it the beginning of a different approach, Blackwell replied, his usual certainty noticeably absent. As you suggested. Before they could continue, Catherine Winter's car pulled up alongside Blackwell's Range Rover. She approached quickly, concern evident in her stride. Elijah, have you seen the news? She called, waving her phone. Carmen's doctor, the specialist Blackwell brought in. He's given an interview about her case. Alarm shot through Elijah. What did he say? Nothing confidential, she assured him quickly. He's discussing the connection between agricultural chemicals and respiratory diseases, using Carmen's case as an example of the human cost of inadequate protections for farm workers. It's already gaining traction nationally. The three of them watched the video on Catherine's phone. Dr. Cortez, calm and authoritative, explaining how decades of exposure to unregulated pesticides had destroyed Carmen Torres's lungs, connecting her personal story to broader issues of environmental justice and worker protection. Did you arrange this? Elijah asked Blackwell, unable to hide his astonishment. I merely suggested to Dr. Cortez that his research might benefit from public attention, Blackwell admitted. The specific direction he took was his own choice. 6 months later, the Torres Equine Recovery Center celebrated its official grand opening. What had begun as a tentative experiment had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The simple but functional facilities included spacious stables designed for traumatized horses' specific needs, open paddocks with clear sightlines that reduced anxiety, and a central building where humans and animals could interact in a controlled, peaceful environment. Abuela Carmen, seated in a wheelchair but breathing more easily thanks to advanced treatments, cut the ribbon stretched across the main entrance. Beside her stood Elijah, his face more relaxed than it had been in years, and on his other side, surprisingly, stood Richard Blackwell, whose ongoing involvement had transformed from reluctant donor to committed partner. This place is not about breaking spirits, Elijah told the gathered crowd, his voice steady and clear where once he would have whispered. It's about rebuilding trust. Horses traumatized by abuse and neglect help people who carry their own invisible wounds, and together, they find a path to healing. In the months since their confrontation at the creek, Blackwell had undergone a transformation that few would have believed possible. The ruthless businessman hadn't disappeared entirely. He still negotiated aggressively and maintained his empire. But something fundamental had shifted in his approach to the center and the community around it. The center quickly developed its specialized niche, rehabilitating horses considered too damaged or dangerous for conventional training. Animals that had been labeled problematic or beyond help found their way to Elijah, each carrying visible and invisible scars from past traumas. Some had physical injuries that had never properly healed. Others bore no external marks but flinched at human touch or sounds that triggered memories of abuse. Tornado remained the heart of the program, his own journey from terror to trust, serving as both inspiration and model. While never completely domesticated, Elijah insisted that he maintain his essential wildness. The magnificent Mustang had developed the confidence to engage with an expanding circle of carefully selected humans. The center's work expanded beyond horses to include the humans who came seeking their own healing. Veterans with PTSD were among the first group to benefit, finding in the silent presence of the horses a comfort that conventional therapy often couldn't provide. They don't judge you, explained Michael Davis, a former Marine who had barely spoken since returning from his third deployment. They read your body, your breathing, your intention. Can't lie to a horse. They see right through the masks we wear for other people. Children from at-risk backgrounds, many from immigrant families like Elijah's, became regular visitors. Those who rarely spoke in school found their voices when whispering secrets into the attentive ears of patient horses. Teenagers with histories of violence learned about boundaries, respect, and gentleness through interactions that couldn't be forced or manipulated. Horses are mirrors, Elijah explained to a group of visiting social workers. They reflect our emotions, amplify our fears and our hopes. When we learn to be present with them, truly present, without agenda or demand, they show us our true selves. Ms. Rodriguez, now a regular volunteer, watched with quiet pride as her former student led the tour. The boy who had once been nearly invisible in her classroom had found his voice and purpose, becoming eloquent when speaking about the animals he loved and the healing they facilitated. Universities began to take notice of the center's success. Colorado State's veterinary program offered Elijah a scholarship to formalize his knowledge of equine behavior, allowing him to divide his time between studies and the center's operations. Documentary filmmakers arrived to record the methods that had proven successful with even the most traumatized animals. Throughout it all, Blackwell remained involved, though in ways few would have predicted. Instead of trying to commercialize the center's success, he focused on expanding its reach, donating additional land when the original 10 acres proved insufficient for the growing program. The environmental remediation he had begun expanded into a comprehensive watershed protection initiative that extended far beyond the original contaminated area. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after the confrontation with Blackwell, Elijah led Tornado out beyond the center's boundaries, toward the hills that rose gradually toward the distant mountains. With no saddle, no bridle, only a colorful rope loosely braided into the Mustang's flowing mane as decoration rather than control, they moved as partners rather than master and beast. "Vamos, hermoso," Elijah whispered, swinging easily onto the broad back that once no human had dared approach. "Today is just for us." They galloped across open meadows, 2 silhouettes against the reddening sky. At a certain point, Elijah simply released his hold on Tornado's mane and spread his arms wide, trusting completely in the animal beneath him. There was no longer a traumatized boy, no longer a terrified Mustang, only 2 souls moving in perfect harmony, proving that the deepest connections transcend species, social classes, and languages, born in the sacred silence of mutual understanding. "We're free, mi amigo," Elijah whispered into Tornado's attentive ear. "Together, we're free." From the veranda of his ranch house, Blackwell observed the distant figures through binoculars. Something in his expression softened for perhaps the first time in decades. Carmen, seated beside him with a shawl around her shoulders despite the mild weather, offered him a cup of coffee from the tray between them. "You know, Senor Blackwell," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years, "my grandmother used to say that horses choose their humans, not the other way around. Tornado chose my grandson because he saw his soul, and perhaps he chose you too, in his own way." As the silhouettes of horse and rider merged with the horizon, they understood that the connections that truly transform lives, those that heal rather than break, that build rather than destroy, transcend the boundaries of species, social status, and language, emerging from the sacred silence of mutual understanding and the redemptive power of unconditional love.